Let's welcome Mike to the program. What's up, Mike?
Pat, it's been an eternity. How you living, brother?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. It's
How's the Scorchstack?
Oh, we're going to jump right to that. So, everybody, Scorchstack, the Ultimate Calgary Flames Substack newsletter. You can check it out online. Scorchstack on Twitter. You might know some of us from the Flames writing world, former Films Nation team. We're doing some phenomenal work. I recommend you check it out, especially during these tough times where the team isn't very good.
You do some good memes.
Great memes. What are you talking about?
Good memes.
Best memes. Come on.
Elite meme game.
Thank you. It means a lot that you would say that on your radio show at 1 a.m. for everybody.
That's what I'm here for.
Excellent. So let's talk about a couple of things. So first thing, George and the double standards. I think the main reason why there's a double standard there, and like you touched on it, is Backlund is obviously a much more valuable player than Bennett. So of course, he's paying his penance immediately for taking the goal against when, they score on the power play. That's fine. You can live with that. The main thing I want to stress with that is, and this is something that was touched on in the postgame show when you guys mentioned score effects. So you're down 3 goals at that point. You're likely, dreading your existence and wishing that you weren't playing the Oilers right now and playing such a miserable game. But realistically, I think Jeff Ward did the right thing, which is continue to play that 3M line version 2. More or less, they've been capable of actually creating something out of nothing. And they were pretty strong tonight down the stretch, regardless of how things went, outside of, the Josh Archibald goal, which was kind of, the worst thing that could have happened to them at that point. So, don't play Sam Bennett after he takes a dumb penalty, because I think we've seen enough of that over the years that there's going to be zero value you can extract out of that player. And continue to play Michael Backlund despite, downside of his career to some degree, but still being an effective player.
Mm-hmm. And in fairness, they still played Bennett. It's not like they benched Bennett tonight. They still played him more than 14 minutes tonight.
Yeah, I just look at the situation, it's a depreciating asset in Sam Bennett. The whole thing with the agent going to the media and causing, a storm about whether or not he has a future there or he wants to change his scenery, that's irrelevant. At that point, given the relationship at this point, I think you should just largely ignore it and maintain the status quo. Play him when you think he can be effective and you can get the right matchups. The concern with matchups specifically, though, tonight, Jeff Ward didn't match the best lines against best lines. In a game against Connor McDavid, you atypically should be playing a shutdown line. They're down Derek Ryan, they're down Sean Monahan. They've got a lot of AHL depth on the roster, but you should probably have played the 3M line against Connor McDavid rather than, I think it was 45 seconds at 5 versus 5 tonight. That's not an effective use of your skill set or your roster, especially when you're quite literally playing one of the best players in the league and he's already put up a hat trick. There's no matching there. And you're starting to see, the odd shift with Glenn Godin. He's a rookie. He's in his first game. He's picking his nose on TV, like we saw. He's not cut out for that, and that's not a fault against him. But you want to put these players into positions to succeed. That's not happening. And we've certainly seen that down the losing streak here. And not only that, but prior to that, when they're winning games, but they're, barely hanging in there or not producing much. So I think on the topic of tactics and, whether or not Jeff Ward is capable, it's a multifaceted problem, and you touched on it with Robert as well, touched on it with George. There's roster composition problems. That falls on the shoulders of Brad Treliving. There's tactical and decisions in-game and pivoting when things aren't working. That falls on Jeff Ward and his coaching staff. But, there's also the concern about whether or not the players are engaged and things like that. And I just think it's superfluous. You're not, it's very easy for us as fans or as analysts or people, 80 feet up to look at body language and say, hey, that's a red flag. The players aren't engaged. And I would challenge anybody who says that, are you engaged 100% of the time at your job? I know even despite my efforts, some days I have days where I'm like 80% engaged, despite my best efforts.
For sure.
So, and I think that's something that needs to be considered, specifically in a pandemic where mental health is a concern and it's hard to stay focused. And, there are things like that out of your control that you're doing the best you can to manage. It doesn't excuse performance necessarily, but I think that, we need to take a step back and maybe evaluate the situation a bit more empathetically or, maybe as objectively as possible. And that's really hard as a fan because, You have this vested interest in something that is an escape. I know it is for me, and I know it is for you, right? Despite this being your career, but like you want to see the team succeed and you want to be there for all of it. But I would say, take a step back, double check, when you're criticizing engagement and things like that. You don't know these people. I don't know these people. You only know them to the degree that you do in your day job, but I don't know how they operate, and I think that's a significant thing to address. But the other thing I kind of want to touch on here, if I got just a little bit more time, and I'll get off here because I know you got plenty of friends to speak with, and I'm hoping, Shirley or that lovely woman from a couple of years ago is on the line here. The penalty kill in particular, which, it's something of, obsession for myself.
Interest for you.
Yeah, it's the greatest thing in hockey. What more can you ask for than 4 people against the weight of the world, specifically in a situation against Connor McDavid? But the greater kind of problem with the Calgary Flames penalty kill that I've been noticing and tracking specifically is the disparity of, I guess, like a power kill approach, which they've used in years prior, where they're not actively engaging or pressing as much in the D zone in their 1-3 formation, or, if they're playing a diamond, they're being capitalistic of suppressing, shooting lanes to pounce on a rebound or move up ice. I think the larger scope of the problem, though, lies, specifically with a neutral zone formation and, trying to prevent entries. And there's a bit of disparity in the units right now. They're using Joachim Nordstrom and Elias Lindholm. It's not necessarily the best option there, I feel, especially when you have other options like the secondary unit with Backlund and Mangiapane, where they're playing a little bit more aggressive in their 1-3 and 2-2. Breaking up entries. I believe there was like 1 or 2 instances of that with Mangiapane tonight, which were pretty fantastic. And I think that's a good thing that we need to highlight from the coaching staff, which is, they're putting players like that in a position that we didn't see in years past. And it is working to some degree, but we're not getting the bounces that you would need or that people would be clinging to, which is, shorthanded chances. Backlund had one tonight, but we need more of that because, in years past, the Flames have been among the league leaders in shorthanded goals and shorthanded chances for, and it's a real difference maker when you have the ability to create offense shorthanded. Now, you don't want to be shorthanded. I think we can all agree on that, but if you're spending about 4 or 5 minutes a game like the Flames are in that situation and you're struggling to score goals, maybe it's a time, to change that strategy, play a little bit more aggressively, especially when you're down a goal or 2. You have nothing to lose at that point. The likelihood that you're going to score, 2 or 3 goals to get back in it is limited at that point. It's, a lot of models in hockey are built around that to showcase that. And so you should be taking those chances. And if they're not doing it, then that's a problem. And that's a significant gap that they're missing from last year and years prior.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's one of those situations where even then you wonder exactly what the culprit is for that. Is it a personnel thing? Is it a tactical thing? And I think there's probably a little bit of both. I think that you made a really good point about the usage. Yeah, it's and that's why I say, like, so much of this is kind of based on there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of negative right now, and it's kind of a big snowball that's encompassing a lot of different areas of this team right now.
Yeah, and the one thing to kind of emphasize with the pandemic and, the situation with people asking for trades or changes with the personnel, it's a flat cap, remember? There was no boost to the salary cap this year. That's a significant concern for this team who, prior to injury, they were putting Derek Ryan on the taxi squad every day to save pennies on the dollar. We're talking about teams literally moving players in and out, transactions daily on, cap friendly to say, hey, we're saving this much money, because they're hoping to claw back as much as possible so that if there is an opportunity to pounce on like a floundering team like the Predators or, God forbid, the Flames in a week or two, that teams are going to be calling and looking to utilize whatever cap space they have or move out assets when necessary. I'll wrap this up by saying, a lot of people are harping on Brad Treliving fairly for, roster decisions and composition issues with whether or not this is a fast team or a high-scoring team or a tough team. To keep in mind, a couple of years ago, this was a pretty skilled roster, really skilled roster that was pretty effective. And then they lost in the playoffs, and what did people want? They wanted more size. What did they do? They added more size and grit to keep people happy because they were being pushed around. And then the team's identity shifted to, they have some skill, they've got some grit, But, the imbalance is there. And there was a salient point earlier saying, what's the identity? This team should be skilled because I think that they have the resources available currently to be that team. But they also have a lot of money wrapped up in players that aren't useful in that regard. It's not to crap on Milan Lucic, who had a relatively good game this evening and a few games this season, but there's a lot of money in this roster that is not being used effectively. That if they had a couple extra $1 million in cap space, it would be fair to assume that the front office would be targeting players to help augment the offensive side of this game. Or maybe they needed a bit more, adjustments on the blue line, which is a common theme with this team over the last few years. So if this team is capable of, winning a few games over the next few weeks, stringing together some wins, the narrative changes, which it always does, because if the team is winning, people are going to be happy. And if the team is losing, people are going to call in at 1 a.m. to yell at you, and they're going to demand change. But it's, they're in a situation where they're just up against the cap, and it's because of mistakes and gambles that haven't worked out, and they've tried to rectify it. And they're not completely out of the woods. They can make the playoffs this year for all I care. But they still have a cap problem next year. And
they got a cap problem, and they also have a situation where, it almost doesn't matter if the narrative temporarily changes in the regular season until they actually get over and do something of significance in the playoffs with this group, with this core group. Then it almost doesn't matter what happens between now and then. Like,
totally.
Miss it, yeah, that's bad. Make it, well, people are like, well, yeah, you should have made it, and now you better go do something with it. So they're kind of in a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation right now. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, it's not fun, but I mean, this is no different than the twilight years of the Iginla era. It's just you need to be really creative and you need to take some risks. The team under Brad Treliving has took some risks, but he's also burnt, 4 cards by being on his 4th coach by now. Can't fire Jeff Ward at this point and bring in a 5th coach. It's just not going to look good on him. Like, you can't do that at that point after you just, paid out the butt for Markstrom and Tanev in the offseason. Like, it's not a fun situation to be in. I don't envy him. The business side of this is something that I think a lot of people should pay more attention to. There's a lot more to this game and this sport. If you take a step back and be a bit more objective about the problems that impact the team you cheer for, and try to be a little bit heartless about the situation despite how hard it is because you care. But at the same time, I'm on the business side of things in my day job. I have to make a lot of hard decisions that are really difficult. And sometimes you take a couple of risks that work out from a business standpoint and you save some money, or you have to go explain to your boss, why you didn't come up big this quarter and you're costing the company a bit more money than you expected, or maybe your program fails and you have to pay the responsibility for that. And I've done that. I think it's probably the time, next year or so to really assess whether or not the program that Brad Treliving's put together over his tenure is actually effective. I don't think it has been. And that's been to, his fault directly and indirectly by taking some risks. And that's where we are right now.
Good stuff, Mike. It's good to hear you, my friend.
Yeah. Subscribe to Scorchstack, free Romina. Thanks for your time, Pat.
Be well, buddy.